Y'all ready? Okay. All right. Standing rigid on pews creaking within my chest, I've got a choir of robed urchins squealing stale hymns about the books I should like, who I should admire, who I ought to be, and who should admire me. Hijackers in halos, they strip me of my beliefs and replace them with the overstuffed, overpuffed rhetoric of cold souls wandering, souls who've never set foot inside my home or inside my bones, but I have. Day after day, I wander and sort through endless piles stacked high across my heart, but I'm not sure any of these files belong to me anymore. Someone else's head staked wooden atop my shoulders. I know what I'm supposed to think, but can't remember the last time that I thought for myself. If I do, will you lock me up? And if I don't, aren't I locking myself up? When did disagreement become criminal? And what's the sentence for not seeing it your way? Most opinions deserve to be forgotten. Most butchers masquerade as beauties, and honesty is often an outlawed language. Not all angels wear white, not all devils have horns, and not all mistakes should be avoided, because struggle is where church really happens, and imagination calls us into the places that our past warned us not to go. So isn't it time that I open some of these doors? I knock and I knock and I knock, but no one seems to answer. Perhaps I don't know the right question. Perhaps I'm too stupid or too small. Perhaps I don't matter. I wonder, is anybody up there really listening? Am I not shouting loud enough? Or can my tongue not enunciate proper the magical words? Love is a hint of heaven, but sometimes it feels more like a tease. Pitchforks and perfection, messengers, maniacs and miracles, dueling maestros. I've seen God, I've seen the devil, and I'm not always sure which is which, so am I visually impaired? Or do those two often appear more similar than I care to admit? Like Mark said, my name is Josh Reebok. I currently reside in New York City with my wife, Kristen. In a few weeks, we will be celebrating our 10-year wedding anniversary. Thank you. We're very excited about that. As a job, if we want to define ourselves by our vocation, which as Americans we definitely like to do, you can define me as a writer. That's what I do for a living. And if you were to crack open my chest and begin to dissect and excavate my soul, you would find in real time represented there what was rendered in that poem. You would find a very, very, very confused man. You would find lots of conflict. You would find laughter and lust. You would find judgment and jealousy and joy. You would find imperfections and perversions. You would find memories of childhood that are so wonderful, I just want to relive them time and time again. And you would find memories of not only childhood, but adolescence and adulthood that I wish I could lock away and never think of again. You would find lots of conflict. You would find probably far more doubt than faith. You would find a guy who sometimes looks into the face of his wonderful wife and sees a bright smile stamped across her cheeks, and he doesn't know how he did it, but somehow he made her that happy. And then you would sometimes find a guy who maybe hours, maybe moments later, sees the tears coming down that same girl's face, and he doesn't know how he did it, but he knows that he's the one that put them there. If you looked inside me, you would find a guy who sometimes wakes up and believes in God. And you would find a guy who a lot of days wakes up and seems more confident that all this is made up and I just do it to make myself feel better, but none of it's real. And the reason you would find all that inside of me is because, like most of you in this room, I am a human being. I am human. I'm not an angel. I'm not a saint. I don't have a halo or a harp, but my great tension with Christianity growing up was often that I thought in order to have a relationship with God, I had to be something other than human. I thought that I somehow had to have wings sprout out of my back and become perfect, or at least become more together than I was. I thought that that's what it meant to have a relationship with God, was to relinquish my humanity. But what I'm learning more and more as I continue to get older, that if I really want to encounter full life and the fullness of God that I can find in this world, it's not done by pretending my humanity away, but rather by learning what it means that God created me as human and embracing those things fully. And that's what we're going to explore for the next 26 minutes and 58 seconds. See, what I normally want to do with all that stuff I just talked about is I want to hide it, right? I want to hide it. I want to pretend it's not there. And I want to go out and with my wife and my friends and my bartender and barista, I want to be this Photoshop version of me, right? Where there's no blemishes, there's no flaws, there's nothing that somebody else might not like, nothing that they might detest or find me in as lacking. And so it's like I end up playing a part. And so I kind of pretend these areas of myself away. I do it after a few days. I do it for weeks. I do it for months. There are areas of my life where I have kind of locked away and tried to forget. I've done it for so long. It's like I don't even know how to access them anymore. And typically when I do this, with some either area or the entirety of my life, I have this one moment. Here's what will happen. Is I'll wake up one morning. I'll roll out of bed, I'll set my feet down, but it doesn't feel like I'm setting my feet down on the floor. It feels like I'm setting my feet down on a stage. And then I get up and I wander over. I open up my big closet with 3 shirts inside. I try to determine which one I'm going to wear, and I put it on, and it doesn't feel like I'm putting on my clothing. It feels like I'm putting on a costume. And then I sit and I talk with people, and they ask me how I'm doing. And it doesn't feel like I'm having a conversation. It feels like I'm reading from a script, just playing some part in what I have done either that day or over the years leading up to that day, is I have said, God, it is better for me not to be a human being, but to be an actor. It is better to pretend my way through life rather than allow myself to be seen by the world around me. I have this friend named Brian. And Brian teaches at this very prestigious university in Chicago. And so when you go into his office, he has this big encased diploma on his wall. And so it's very intimidating. And every time I see him, we kind of have a joke about it. But when I saw Brian last year, it was late, probably like 11:30 in Chicago, and we decided to get some dinner. And in Chicago, there's kind of 3 main food groups: steak, hot dog, and pizza. And so we were like, well, what do we want to eat? Well, we should probably eat healthy. Let's get steak. And so we walked around Chicago. We finally found this place that was open late. And it's actually under the street, this restaurant is. So you go down this kind of metallic spiral staircase. You walk into this restaurant, and it's all dim, and all the men are wearing fedoras and pocket squares. It feels very mafia, as if across the booth from you there's going to be Al Capone and John Gotti and Lucky Luciano or something like that. And so Brian and I were led by the maitre d' into this corner. We sit down, white tablecloth, single candle between us, flickering on our faces as if we're at a camp out in the wilderness somewhere. We order the biggest steak Chicago has to offer. They come. We've hardly said a word to each other at this point. We just devour these things. By the end, our napkins are just covered in the red carnage of steak juice. We finish, wipe our mouths, and right when Brian is done, he tosses his napkin, drops his knife clattering on the plate, then slides the plate and the candle aside, and he leans in and he goes, Josh, I am 38 years old. And more than anything, you know what I want on a daily basis? Like, do you want to know what I wake up craving every single day? It's not money. It's not 10,000 friends. It's not a better apartment. It's not more accomplishments or more achievements. You want to know what I want every single day? Just this one thing? And I go, yeah, Brian, what is it? And he goes, I just want one moment. Just one moment where I don't have to hide. I just want one moment where I can allow the real version of me to be known by a real version of somebody else, where I don't have to say things that aren't true, pretend I like things that I don't like, pretend I believe things that I don't really believe. I just want one moment where I don't have to hide. And it was so cool for me because I felt like as Brian was articulating, so briefly, those words, I felt like he was articulating something that rumbles in me every day. I long so badly to be set free from the need to hide. I don't know about you, but I find there is nothing more exhausting than pretending to be something that I'm not. And I have squandered so many days in so many moments with people doing that very thing. I long so badly not to be an actor, but to be a human being, to have the freedom to no longer hide. And interestingly enough, this is actually one of the very first liberties that God gives to humanity. So there's this book. It's becoming quite popular. It's called Genesis. It's in the beginning of the Bible. It's done well. And there's this story in the beginning of that book where God creates the world, right? It's just like the pinnacle of artistic creation. It's like, oh, stars. So now there's like just tinsel hanging down from this oblivion that no one can ever touch. Here's animals. And I'm just going to make animals, but I'm going to give animals sound. And actually before that, I'm going to invent sound. And actually before I invent sound, I'm going to invent sound waves. And I'm going to invent ears and nostrils and sight and colors and smoke. I'm just going to invent everything. And so God creates the entire world. It's just this full place. And then God grants human beings the opportunity and privilege to inhabit this creation. So he creates Adam and Eve, and they walk in perfect harmony, perfect intimacy, fully alive human beings in this fully alive world. But God tells them, he says, there is one thing you don't want to do. There's one thing I'm going to tell you to stay away from. There is a tree at the far end of this garden called Eden. And if you eat from it, all of the fullness that you have now will now be stripped away. And you will spend the rest of your life pursuing the very things that you already have. Like you will invite into your life, like hatred and anger and guilt and loneliness and struggle with your self-image. You're going to invite all that in, and you are going to be the one who invites all of these ghosts into your life that will haunt you every day. I'm telling you, don't eat of this tree. And so Adam and Eve, they look at God and they say, okay, that's just one thing. One bullet point on the paper, I can do that. That's not hard. But then one day they go out there. And they wander up to this tree. And the sun just happens to be very, very bright and shining that day. And so all these giant pieces of red fruit are just bobbing off the branches like rubies. And Eve reaches up and she pulls one off and she takes a bite. And as the juices are still running down her chin, she hands it to Adam. Adam takes a bite. And in that moment, they are confronted really for the first time with the fact that they are human. It's like for the first time, they see not only that they're physically naked, but that their naked souls are imperfect, that there's flaws there. And so what do Adam and Eve do? And this is like however many years ago this is like whoever jotted this story down for the very first time, they knew that this wasn't a story just that happened once, but a story that happens over and over and over. Because when Adam and Eve come face to face with their humanity, what do? They hide. They hide. They can't take it. They can't take the fact that they're not angelic. And so they run into the bushes and they hide and they cover themselves in branches. They cover themselves in leaves, and then they sit there. And I would imagine that the carousels of their mind then just begin to spin with all these thoughts that maybe spin through our heads on a daily basis. How could I ever face God now? I don't even want the person next to me to see this. I don't even want to see this. I don't know how to deal with this. I need to deal with this first, and then I'll go and let people see me. But it's like all just like cluttering in their brain until all of a sudden the footsteps of God come padding over the dewy grass of that end of Eden. And he's walking and he's walking and he's walking, and Adam and Eve can hear that he's close, and so they cringe behind these trees, not wanting to be seen, wanting to hide. And then God stops and he looks around, and right in this moment in Genesis chapter 3, we come to the very first question mark in the entire Bible. What's the Bible? It's like 13 million pages long or something like that. This is the moment. This is the very first question mark in the entire Bible. The very first question in the entire Bible is not asked from humanity to God. It's a question that God asks to humanity. God stands there in the garden, Adam and Eve hiding in the bushes, and God says, "Where are you? Where are you?" I find this fascinating because I think probably one of the most often asked questions from me to God is, "God, where are you? God, I'm angry, where are you? God, my family is sick, where are you? God, my finances are frightening right now. Where are you? God, why couldn't you have given me the talents of that person? God, where are you? God, my marriage sucks. Where are you? God, life feels so uncertain. I'm so frustrated. I'm so tired. God, where are you? But in this moment, God stands there and he goes, I'm right here. I haven't moved. Where are you? Now, I'm going to make an assumption here. I make a lot of assumptions in my life. 98% of them are wrong or something like that. Or else I have to deal with that right now. But I'm going to make an assumption here. My assumption is that God is not unaware of where they actually are. I think God's probably sitting there going, look, I know I created photosynthesis in the leaves and everything, but these leaves actually aren't that thick. I can see you sitting there. Like, I can see Adam, your head is sticking out above the branches. I can see you. I made this garden. I know every single part of it. I know where you are, so I don't want to know where are you physically right now. What I want to know is where are you here and where are you here? What is so bad that you would feel the need to hide? Where are you right now? What's really going on? God calls out to them, where are you? And it's like in doing so, God extends to them this amazing invitation. He invites them to come out of hiding, to be fully intimate with Him, the fullness of their humanity in matrimony with the fullness of His divinity, not to leave their humanity in the trees and come out, but to bring the fullness of who they are into the fullness of who He is. It's like God is making a statement to Adam and Eve, and to me all these years later, it's like God is saying, it's never holier to hide. Sometimes I'm really good at kidding myself. It's not a good gift to have, and I have it. And a lot of times I tell myself that I want to be a godly man, but I don't think that's true. I think a lot of times what's true is I want to be perceived as a godly man. And they're two different things, because the truth is, if you want to be godly, if that's the perception you want to attain, if that's your ultimate goal, the best way to do that is to hide. But if you want to be godly, if I want to be godly, God says, you come out of hiding. God says, where are you? And I wonder, if He was to ask me or you that question today, how would you respond? If God walked up to you today, this final Sunday in November in Southern California, and said, hey, where are you? Where are you here and where are you here? How would you respond? And maybe we shouldn't say how would we respond. How should we respond? Because a lot of us, I know me, I would probably go, oh God, I'm good. And He'd go, no, really. How are you? Maybe for some of us, the truthful answer would be, God, you really want to know how I am? God, I'm afraid. I'm really, really afraid. I have this situation at home. I have this situation at work. I have these things I'm being confronted with me. I have these things in my past that feel like they're being resurrected again, and I thought they were gone. God, I'm afraid. For some of us, maybe the honest answer would be, God, I have joy. I mean, some of my friends are having a hard time, but I am filled right now. I feel so good, and sometimes I feel bad about the fact that my life is good, and I want to celebrate it. For some of us, maybe the honest answer would be, God, I'm angry. Maybe the even more honest answer would be, God, I'm angry with you. Maybe for some of us, the honest answer would be, God, I just don't even think I believe in you anymore. I came here today, Sunday morning, I don't even know why. I don't believe in any of this. I just did it to make somebody else happy. Maybe for some of us, the honest answer would be, God, I'm numb. God, I'm lonely. God, I'm confused. Maybe for some of us, the honest answer would be, God, you want to know where I am? God, I haven't even paused long enough in my chaotic life to stop and reflect so that I can have an answer to that question. But if God were to ask you, what would you say? I'm going to tell you another story about being a human being. Is that okay? Good. Okay. So 9 years ago, almost 9 years ago now, I was a pastor. And I was a very bad pastor. So y'all are very lucky. I don't even want to go into the details of what it means to be a bad pastor. Let me just tell you, it's not pretty. And I was a bad pastor. But I had this one moment. I was sitting in my office. My solitaire score was insane. And I'm sitting there and I went, is this really what I want to do for the rest of my life? Is this really what I want to do? And I sat there, I thought about it for a moment. And in really brief time, I came to the conclusion, this is not what I want to do. So I asked myself, if I could do anything with my life, what would I do? And the answer came almost immediately. If I could do anything as a job for the rest of my life, I would play lead guitar for Guns N' Roses. I'm like, that's just like, right? I mean, every young boy's dream. And so I thought of that. I was like, oh, that'd be great. But there were two problems. The first one was, Guns N' Roses has a guitar player. The second problem is, I don't play guitar. So I was like, okay, well, what's plan B? So I thought about it, and the real answer came even immediately. If I could do anything for the rest of my life, I would be a writer. I knew that's what I wanted to do. That's what I loved as a child. And once I got reacquainted with that desire as an adult, it was just obvious. I was like, that's what I want to do. And so with the wild support and encouragement of my wife, I quit my job as a pastor to become a writer. And I definitely had these kind of delusions of grandeur of how that was going to transpire and following. I mean, it was me in a hot air balloon, shoveling down on the world great literature for all to read and be nourished by. Like this was kind of the idea. But it didn't go anything like that. I quit my job and I started to try to find my way as a writer. And 4 weeks after I quit, my father passed away. And I would wager that, like probably many of us in here, I had a very, very complicated relationship with my dad. There was a lot of wonder to it, and then there was a lot of real horror to it at the same time. But nevertheless, losing my dad was devastating. I think losing him at any time would have been devastating, but I think particularly losing him right when I was making a big change and I felt like this little boy was really frightening. And so in the aftermath of my dad dying, I kind of coped with it the only way I knew how. And that's basically, I started powering down a lot of my emotional engagement in the world. I started powering down a lot of the questions that were rattling in my head that might take me to places that had uncomfortable answers. Questions about God and me and life and my relationship with my dad, my family history, just everything. I said, I would rather just not deal with it. And I just shut it down. And so I did. And so I got back to writing. I said, okay, I'm going to become a writer. And so I'm sending things off to these different publishing houses and magazines and so on and so forth. And I'm just getting rejected time and time and time again. And actually more than rejection, I'm just getting ignored time and time and time again. So a few weeks go by and I get a phone call from my older sister. I have an older sister and a younger sister. I'm the middle boy, thus the therapy bills that I have to pay on a regular basis. And I get this phone call from my older sister. And my older sister told me that my mom was sick. My mom had gotten very ill very quickly. And that if I wanted to see her before she went in to have a liver surgery, I needed to go back to Chicago. At the time, I was living in Austin, Texas. And I knew I wanted to see my mom. But, none of this is what I was envisioning when I had quit my job. I was picturing the dream. I was picturing the smooth path. I was picturing all these great things, nothing like what was transpiring. But nevertheless, I wanted to see my mom before surgery. So I went from Austin back to Chicago and got to see my mom. The doctor assured us that she was, strong and healthy. And the following morning, once the surgery was complete, the office, the waiting room phone rang, and I picked it up, and it was a doctor, and he said, "Is this Josh?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Is your whole family there?" And I just knew. And he said, "I need to see your whole family." So I go to this consultation room with my wife and my sisters and a couple other folks, and we're in there and we're waiting. And the doctor comes in a few minutes later, and he's just holding his clipboard over his chest, and he looks at us. And without saying a thing, he said everything. He looked down. He ran his hand through his hair and he just said, "I'm so sorry. We lost her." And in the aftermath for me of losing my dad and me having already powered down a lot of my life and disconnected from so much of my thoughts and emotions and relationships, this kind of sent me over the edge in that regard. I didn't want to engage anyone. I became a shadow to my wife, to my sisters. I became a shadow even to my own awareness of my own emotions. God was the last person that I wanted to engage or talk to or hear from. But I still had to pursue the dream, right, of becoming a writer. And so the next year went on, and I'm writing and submitting things and getting rejected and rejected and rejected. And finally, I caught this odd and unexpected break, I guess you would call it. I got asked to speak at this university in the middle of Kansas, the Sunflower State. And so I went to Kansas, and I was very nervous. I was very nervous because it felt like so much was riding on it. It was like one of those frightening moments where you feel like not only your present, but your future is riding on what you're able to do in 30 minutes on a stage or in any kind of environment. So I was very, very nervous. And so I arrive at campus, and while I'm there, they have me staying at this like castle-like structure. It's like one tall stone tower, like Rapunzel might, lank her hair down from. So I drop my stuff off there, and I walk across, this big quad, and I get to the auditorium, and I'm sitting backstage behind the curtain, and I can hear the place filling up and all these people coming in, and I'm like, oh, why did you come? You guys are so stupid. Oh, this is going to be awful. And I'm sitting backstage, and finally the time comes for me to come out, and I come out on stage, and in the first 10 minutes, it's just couldn't go worse. I am bombing in front of this entire auditorium of people. And what for them is just like a miserable person to listen to, for me is so much more seismic than that. Because for me, I think I've been almost a year unemployed. I'm not providing anything for my wife. And I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about that as a man. My mom is gone. My dad is gone. I've never felt more like a child than I do right now. And it just felt like it was all just crumbling down right in front of this auditorium of people. And so finally I labored to the end, and I was so embarrassed. I was so just humiliated. I didn't even want to look at anybody afterwards. So I actually left through a side door and hurried across campus and got to my little Rapunzel tower, and went up the stairs, and I went into my room, and I shut the door, and I laid down on the bed, and I just wept. It's like, when I look back on that now, this was 7 or 8 years ago now. When I look back on that moment now, I don't even know what I was grieving or crying for. I don't know if it was because I had bombed on stage, or maybe it was because for the first time, I don't know how long I was engaging just the weight of the previous year. I don't know, but all I know is that I cried myself to sleep. And I didn't wake up until about 2 or 3 in the morning when there was a loud knock on my door. So I get up, and I kind of stumble my way through the dark, and I open the door, and there are 2 people standing in the hallway. Because of the way the lights were configured, lights in the hallway, none in my room, I can see only these 2 figures in silhouette. And so I turn on the light, and now I can see who they are. Standing in front of me, it's the university pastor and the dean of students. And so then you try to kind of do this situational arithmetic in your head, where you're trying to understand what would bring these 2 people to my door at 3 in the morning. And so they look at me and they go, Josh, I'm terribly sorry to bother you at such an unorthodox hour, but we have a situation here on campus and we think you might be able to help. Now again, I'm doing the arithmetic on the chalkboard of my mind. Okay, here's what I know. I've met the 2 of you. I know no one else, and I know that Kansas is the sunflower state. I'm not sure how that qualifies me as an expert on any situation here. And they look at me and they say, well, here's what's happening. We have a young lady, a student here. She's 19 years old, and her mom was just killed. And we know that about a year ago you lost your mom and dad. So we were wondering if you'd be willing to meet with this young lady. And again, all these things that I just completely shut myself down to. One of the things I love shutting myself down to most is the idea that my pain might be someone else's redemption. I just did not want to be open to that idea. But when they asked me that, they said, Josh, will you go meet with this girl? The guy I was didn't want to go at all, but the guy I wanted to be wanted to go. And so I said, yes, I'll do this. And so I get my jacket and I put it on. And as we're walking out, they stop me and they say, one more thing about this girl, Josh. This young lady, she also just recently found out that she's pregnant. And so we walk down out of the tower and we're walking across at this 3 in the morning, strange blue hour of night where all the trees and buildings look like calligraphy on the sky. And we wander our way over to her dorm. And I sit down on this couch and they go fetch her. And as they're bringing her out, I'm racking my brain. What can I say? What can I say? What can I say? And after asking myself that question 3 or 4 times, I realized there's nothing I can say. And so this girl comes out and hair pulled behind her head into a ponytail, sweatpants, and just white as a ghost. I mean, you could tell in her eyes that she had just lost her whole world. And she comes and she sits down and I don't say a word. And we just sit there and she just starts sobbing. And just me and this girl I don't even know her name. She's just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. And after a few minutes, I finally, decided to break what had been this, for me, unbearable silence. And I said, so tell me, what is the dominant thought in your mind right now? And she looks at me and she says, do you really want to know? I said, yeah, I really want to know. She said, 1, how in the world am I supposed to believe that God exists? And 2, if God exists, how in the world am I supposed to believe that He's good? And it was such an odd moment. I mean, it was heartbreaking. But I also felt like this girl was verbalizing what for the previous year had been going on in me, but I just wasn't willing to engage. That all that stuff in relation to me quitting my job and the failures I had felt, and my mom and my dad, all that stuff was just percolating within me, but I wasn't willing to engage that kind of depth. And then right in front of me, this girl said it on my behalf. And so she said it and I nodded, and then she broke down crying again. And after this extended period of silence, once more I asked her, I said, so tell me about your mom. And until sunup, this girl told me stories about her mom, about how her mom taught her how to play poker and their vacations they went on together and how they would shop and the conversations and the books they would read and how much just wild, wild affection she had for her mom and how much wild affection her mom had for her. Periodically, she got nauseous. And I didn't know if it was from the pregnancy or the grief, but she kind of scurried off to the bathroom. And every time I assumed she wouldn't come back. But every time she did, and we talked. And like I said, finally the sun came up. And when it did, the dean and the university pastor returned. And they came in. They were taking her to the airport. She was flying home to see her dad. And I don't even remember if we shook hands or said goodbye. All I know is that they left. And I was left once more to walk across this campus back to my little tower. And just like I had hours earlier, I walked up that spiral staircase. I went in and I fell down on the bed and I wept again. It's like that moment, that day, that I don't even know what you call it, that thing that happened to me over the course of my time in Kansas. It was this profound reminder, one of many in that season for me, that as a human being, God has created me to be a 3-dimensional person of depth, who engages people in the depths of who they are, who engages the depths of who I am, who doesn't shut down his emotions and his thoughts and his dreams and his desires and his grief, but who is willing to engage them fully, 3-dimensionally. It seems like over and over and over again, God desires for us to be 3-dimensional beings who are fully engaged in the fullness of life and the fullness of God. But so often instead, rather than choosing to live 3-dimensionally, I choose to live as a shadow. Rather than being a person, a human of depth, I'm a shallow human being. I'm afraid of my emotions. I don't want to engage them. I'm afraid of my thoughts, my questions, my doubts. I'm afraid of real intimacy with my wife, with my friends, even with God. What about you? Are you living your life 3-dimensionally? Let me ask it to you this way. When's the last time you allowed your spirit, right? This is the language Jesus uses. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength. I mean, spirit, psyche, and body. When's the last time you allowed your spirit to be moved? Maybe to tears. Maybe to anger where you said, this is not right. But I'm going to be open enough to the fact that God has made me a human with a spirit that is meant to be moved. When the last time you allowed your spirit to be moved towards anger so that you might respond with justice? I mean, in the New Testament, we see a crying Jesus. We see a table flipping Jesus. We see a rejoicing Jesus. Is your soul, are you engaging your life, your humanity, in the depths of your own soul? What about your mind? I mean, when's the last time you allowed your mind to be challenged or pushed? Sometimes the tendency that I have is I just want to read things and expose myself to things that just reinforce what I already think and believe. Because then I go, oh, well, everyone else seems to think this way, so I guess I must be right. And so we put ourselves in these echo chambers that don't stretch us at all. And meanwhile, it's like we have this dark side of the mind that God is going, no, 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 no. I gave you that as a human being. Use it. When's the last time you had a conversation with somebody who thinks very differently than you, lives totally differently than you, challenged you on something, read a book, watched a movie, whatever it is, that allowed yourself, that savored the fact that as a human being, God has given us minds to be challenged and stretched? When's the last time you sat down with somebody, you said, what's really going on? And maybe they said, do you really want to know? And you said, absolutely I do. I had one of these moments earlier. I have since been told multiple times this person's name was Tom. Full disclosure, he was the guy standing over here playing the piano. And before the first service, Tom said, so how's living in New York? And I was like, good. You know, in my most convincing voice, it's good. And I was like, it's really amazing. I feel like it awakens a lot of the goodness in me. I was like, but I also know that it tends to really awaken a lot of my demons. And I expected the conversation, oh, well, it's great to have you this morning. Like I expected that. And I said, it awakens some of my demons. And Tom goes, like what? So be careful with Tom. Watch out. That's like an urban legend. He's coming for you next. But I see God in that. I certainly hope that if I told God had awakened some of my demons, he wouldn't go, huh? I certainly hope God would go, Josh, like what? Let's be three-dimensional. Let's engage. Let's be people of depth. Jesus is always ushering people this way. Jesus is always saying, no, there's more. There's more to me. There's more to you. Jesus, I love the story of the prodigal son when he says, you think of grace like this. Here's the way you tend to think of grace. But I'm going to invite you to think of grace in a way that's not one-dimensional, but three-dimensional, that's not shallow, that's deep, where a son comes back to his dad, and the dad has every right in a human eye to be angry and bitter and to banish him, but instead, he takes him in his arms, gets the mud all over him, kisses him, and before the kid can even say, I'm sorry, he's saying, I forgive you. Jesus says, that's grace. Three-dimensional. Jesus says, you think of love like this, where you do nice things for people, and you send thank you cards, and that's all well and good. But I'm going to tell you, there's a three-dimensional kind of love, a three-dimensional and depth of love, like my story in the Good Samaritan, where when someone's lying there dying on the road, someone doesn't just come up and offer them water. They say, no, I'm going to pick you up. And they put their entire life on hold, and they scoop up this bloody, beaten person, put them over their shoulder, get their blood all over them, and then take them to an inn. And when they get to the inn, they don't just leave. They actually spend the night with them, sitting there, giving them water, helping their wounds. And then in the morning, he gives more money to the innkeeper, and he says, I'm coming back. Jesus says, that's, as a human being, how you have been created to love three-dimensionally with depth. There's a story in Mark chapter 8, and I'll finish with this, where Jesus is leaving a town, and he's walking out with the disciples, and he pauses them on this gravel road, dust kind of coating up from their sandals. And Jesus says, guys, I got a question for you. And they go, oh, I love your questions, Jesus. They're not as good as your miracles, but whatever, we'll take it. What's the question? Jesus looks at them, and he goes, who do people say that I am? And none of them talk. All of a sudden, they're mute, right? None of them want to be wrong. And so Jesus calls on Matthew. Matthew, who do people say that I am? And Matthew looks at him, and he says, well, I mean, I'm just spitballing here. This is just like the top of my head. If I had a minute, I have something better. But this is just what I've heard. Some people say that you're Elijah. Was that wrong? Some people say you're Elijah. And Jesus goes, okay. He goes, John, who do people say that I am? And John goes, well, I like what Matthew did with the whole Elijah piece. I'm just going to piggyback off that. And some people say that you're a great teacher. Jesus goes, okay, that's good. And then he looks right at Peter. And he goes, what about you, Peter? Who do you say that I am? And it's like in this moment, Jesus is calling down our tendency in faith to delegate our answers to other people to go, you sink Jesus on my behalf, tell me the answer, and I'll say it back to him. In this moment, Jesus is going, no, 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 no. Not one-dimensional faith, three-dimensional faith. Not shallow faith, depth of faith, where you don't rely on someone else to seek me on your behalf, but you seek me for yourself. Who do you say that I am? If Jesus were to come up to me and say, Josh, who do you say that I am? I have this feeling I would probably say, like, well, I read this book. He'd go, no. I don't want to know about the book. Well, my pastor says, Josh, when it comes to me and you, I don't care what your pastor says. What I want to know, Josh, is who do you say that I am? Y'all, as human beings, Jesus, he's created us to be people of depth. Three-dimensional. It's not something to run from, but something to embrace. And I told the first service this. I actually originally had a third story to tell, but I just talk way too long, so I can only give you two, so I apologize. Let me pray. God, thank you so much. God, help us to learn, help me to learn to be grateful for the fact that I'm human. It's not something that I have to grieve. It's something, God, that you cherish about me. If you had wanted any person in this room to be an angel, you could have made it so. You could have made any of us perfect if you wanted to, but for whatever reason, God, you wanted us to be human beings. May we not live our lives hiding amongst the bushes and the trees and the leaves. May we not live our lives as actors. God, may we be people who embrace that it's never holier to hide, that we would engage you fully confident that you love us enough, that you love us more than we can understand, that you love every single corner of who I am, even the corners that I completely despise about me. And God, may I learn to be someone who doesn't run from the mind you've given me, run from the soul you've given me, run from the body you've given me, run from the ability, Lord, to engage the depths of life three-dimensionally, not only with others, but with you. Thank you, God. In your name, amen.